So this episode has my favorite title, not because I made it myself, but it's something that's really important about communication. It's communicate or communi-can't. Because just because we have a voice doesn't mean that we're good at communicating. I'm sure we work with other professionals and you think, oh my gosh, why can't they talk to families? Why can't they just get to the point? Why can't they just say it? So we're going to talk about our struggles in our different areas of work, on how to have those especially really difficult conversations with families, predominantly about when we're concerned, where there's a risk or there's worries, and how do we do it. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves from education today. We've got education, police and social care. I've got a good mix. I'm loving this. So from education.
My name's Amy Tomkins. I'm the Deputy Head at Victoria Drive PRU.
Hi, I'm Eileen Shannon, Head Teacher at Victoria Drive PRU.
Hi, my name's Tim Hiller. I'm Detective Inspector in charge of the Safeguarding Hub for Wandsworth and a couple of other boroughs.
And I'm Nathan Walsh. I'm the Early Help Navigator in the MASH team.
What are the key challenges that professionals have when having difficult conversations with families, especially when thinking about child protection or early intervention? So I'm going to ask Tim. So you guys turn up at the house, often loudly, lights are blazing.
Absolutely.
And often it's quite a embarrassing moment. Say you live on, a busy road and no one knows you there, but you've just turned up and you've banged on my door. And you now, as a professional, have to communicate with me who's just like, what's going on? How do you, as police officers, manage to be able to have a conversation and hopefully a clear, calm conversation with families in that environment?
Yeah, well, as you say, we're not exactly subtle in our approach. And often it's not a calm situation that we find ourselves arriving at. But communication is a hugely important element of policing. Especially with the style of policing, I think that we try to encourage in the UK around the concept of policing by consent. We are just members of the public as well, but we have a job to do. So it often requires sort of openness. Listening is hugely important to start that conversation, to allow the person to feel heard, and that may help calm things down. And then it's a matter of being transparent, being honest, helping people to understand the processes, because if people haven't ever been involved with the police before, it's going to be completely alien to them about what we're doing, also why we're there in the first place. So to help them understand that, that can often help with that. I think often people just want to feel informed or want to feel maybe empowered.
Yeah. And it's difficult though, because if you're trying to make someone feel empowered when you've almost overpowered, because often it's not just one police officer, there's a whole van. And it's a really tricky place to be, especially when, and I can imagine if I'm a police officer and I'm asking you a question and I don't know, maybe I watch too much dramas when they say like, no comment. How do you communicate one way? It's hard.
It can be, yeah, absolutely. Again, it's about trying to hear what the person is saying. And I mean, you can try to meet them on the same energy level, which is sometimes helpful. But again, it can sometimes, there will be situations where you can't say the right thing. But, I think most officers will do their best to try to at least understand where the person is coming from. And I mean, there will be higher charge situations where we maybe don't have the luxury to start a long conversation, and it may just need to be some instructions to at least get things under control before that allows for those conversations to start.
I mean, my colleagues here have a different approach. I mean, like with MASH, for example, you receive the referrals of concerns. Often they come from the police and it's very black and white. This is what's happened. And then you've got to make this really difficult conversation with a family to say, you've been referred. Sometimes they don't know because it might have come from a school. It might have come from someone that hasn't shared that with them. How do you even open that conversation to tell a family about other people's worries or your worries?
It's a difficult one because I guess similar to police, we're making a cold call. Someone's answering their phone. They don't know who the number is. Like could be, trying to sell you insurance or something, And it's not always the best time. Sometimes they'll be on the bus going about their daily life. So it's difficult to, first introduce yourself in a way that they kind of understand who you are. and also like explain a bit more about what we do in our job.
Right.
Because I think sometimes people can get stuck in, jumping in to the police told me this, what are you going to say for yourself, or what happened?
Yeah.
So I think setting up the discussion is the most important part, because, I always ask them, is now a good time? Because people are busy, people have got things to do. If you call them and they're on the bus, they're not going to be as forthcoming about what they
are going
really
through.
thinking about, or if they're picking their kids up at school. I never call anyone at 3:10 because, they're
It's thoughtful though, because it is really difficult that you really want to find out the information, but there's so many other components you have to worry about. Like Victoria Drive particularly is would you say it's a school with children with challenging presenting behaviours?
And complex needs, emotional complex needs.
And so I'm assuming that comes with its own vulnerabilities that make you even more worried. How do you manage communicating when you're worried with families?
So, for example, it will come from a disclosure from a child. That's where our major concerns would come from. And, obviously getting their voice is very important. But we will try and speak to the parents before we're contacting, MASH, because the first question MASH will ever ask us, have you spoken to the parents? And that will be for every school, DSL. They'll be asked, have you spoken to the parents? And 99% of the time we will speak to the parents.
I mean, you guys are good. I've got to say though, education, and when I used to manage the MASH team, that was our bugbear, that because of the relationships and not wanting to impact a relationship, sometimes schools wouldn't say to families, I've made this referral. So they would, almost try to make an anonymous referral to say, we've been told this, but don't say where it's come from and how it's come from. What's made you guys so confident to have those conversations?
I suppose the parents have already, the children are with us because they're already in some kind of crisis. And just as you mentioned, open and transparency, we will aim to start saying, life at the moment is challenging for your child, especially in school. And, we're trying to find out why. And we're being curious about that.
I would like to think that we've already had a series of conversations with a family about our concerns.
What, before escalating it?
Before escalating it. And I mean, unless something happens that's immediate and you've got to deal with it there and then. But in most cases, it's an escalation of things. And so having a regular communication with families is key. I think if you drop something on them, like you guys have to do, we don't have to do that. We build relationships with them. And I guess that's why lots of schools find it really difficult, because they have to see them every day. You guys don't have to see them every day. We do. And then sometimes you have to rebuild relationships. But I find if you've been open and transparent, as you say, and you've built that relationship and you keep building that relationship, when you come to have a conversation with them about something, 9 times out of 10, they're pretty open with you.
So some families feel that they're always pinpointed, that you always call me and it's always my child and always my, my situation, and they feel blamed all of the time. And so there is already a shutdown in engagement and being able to communicate with them. How do you assure them that that's not the case?
I think you put the child at the centre. It's about the best outcomes for their child and what are they wanting for their child. And if you focus it on the child and the child's needs, I mean, our conversation will always be, we're trying to assess and calm the crisis so that the child can stay in their mainstream school, which is what the vast majority of parents want for their child. And so that as long as we centre it around the child and say, look, we're all on the same page here, parents, family, carers, school, crew, we all want the child to be successful.
We often ask, where would you like to see your child in 5 years? Where would you like to see your child in 2 years? And that's kind of a really empowering question for parents. And I've never had a parent not say something really positive. They want their child to be able to read. They want their child to be able to write. They want their child to be happy. They want their child to do well. They want their child to have friends, to stay in school.
So then they're open to that conversation. But then when you're going, so you've, supported the Kate team, for example, and that's child abuse investigation. So now these are high level concern that you've had.
100%.
And sometimes you're communicating with the parent who's been alleged to have assaulted that child, whether sexually, emotionally, or physically. that conversation must be different.
They are, yes, those conversations are definitely different. It's, as you say, we're talking about a criminal offence. We're talking about something that may end up in court. So those conversations are extremely difficult, but actually quite similar to what you were saying. It's about putting the child at the centre. In the end, you know, we have a role in the broader safeguarding approach to a child. Our role is to investigate. Our role is to find out the truth. So, and I mean, you know, for older children, they can voice their truth. They can, you know, they can provide that themselves. But certainly for much younger children, they don't have a voice. So we are providing a voice to the voiceless in finding out that truth, whatever it may be. And it may not be a nice truth.
So it's like an advocacy, really.
Yeah, I mean, our role is to safeguard that child, but to find out what happened, and where there's culpability, where someone has behaved in a way that isn't acceptable in the society we live in, then it's right that we take the appropriate approach. And that's not always going to be down the criminal justice route resulting in court. I think there's sometimes a thought that police are there to just lock people up and social services are there to just keep the families together. But I don't think that's accurate. I think everyone involved has the same end goal, which is to see a child safe and happy and thriving. But there are, you know, we each have different abilities and different sort of powers and processes that enable us to be part of that wider, broader, holistic approach. And sometimes ours are a little more, I can't think of the right word.
Robust.
Robust is a good word to use,
Yeah.
yes.
I mean, sometimes we get a referral in MASH and it isn't so robust, and you have to be curious on the phone. I think people don't realize, when you're not reading body language or seeing an environment, how can you have a conversation with someone without the cues, the break, the looking, you know, knowing the response? You don't know whether she's crying. You don't know. How do you have that?
It's very difficult, especially because it's often the first time you're speaking with someone. So you don't know them from a bar of soap. So like, how do you, you know, you just, after a while, start to pick up some cues. You know, they might be talking very quickly. Some people just, you know, naturally ramble on, and, you know, I try to give them the time to just
Ramble.
Yeah, ramble, because you'll hear things and they'll tell you things that are important, and they'll also feel heard, which helps to build that relationship when you might only have a 10-15 minute call with them. And you're trying to
that's
get
the
some
problem
key.
as well. So for example, you get assigned X amount of cases a day and you need to talk to all of these families, right? And each family, it's like almost a GP, and you're assigned 10 minutes. But the communication that needs to really happen probably needs to foster that relationship over 30 minutes. How are you going to get that balance without impacting your whole daily work?
It's very, very tricky. And I think it's preparing well for you know, what you're going to ask and what you really want to know. You've got to have a goal about what.
Right. So
what you
direct
wanna,
to the point.
Yeah. And I think also listening to what they say, so that, you know, you can use their answers to kind of get more information that's more pertinent. You know, so if they say to you, you know, I'm worried about a certain aspect of the child's life, well, you might say to them, you know, what causes you to worry? And that kind of, you know, I guess unpacks the situation a bit more and helps you, I guess, be a bit more structured in
The
what they're saying.
conversation.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, in your school, do you have like a varied racial and cultural mix of children?
So we have 1/3 white British, 1/3 Black Afro-Caribbean, and 1/3 other.
And how did the conversations or communication differ when you're speaking to each of those groups?
So we've really, really thought about our curriculum. Our curriculum is very nurture-based. All children need nurture, regardless of race. And it's PSHE, which is Personal Social Health Education. We are very clear in the texts, the books that we are using, so that they see themselves, that they can relate to the characters. There's a little black girl with curly hair, little Gizmo, and just so that there's a relatability, and our staff, you know, they're from all sorts of ethnicities.
And do you find that when you're having those difficult conversations with people of a different ethnicity, to say, you know, just British and language, their language might not be English as their first language, how do you manage to have those conversations?
If the language was really compromised, we'd get a translator. I mean, I've done that lots of times. Or I'd use somebody that within the school that spoke another language as well.
We use a charity, a Somali charity. They come quite often to our
So we enable
meetings.
people to be able to hear and be
to
heard
communicate.
and to be able to communicate. But I think also we're dealing with a lot of parents that have additional needs themselves.
Right. So I think that's a whole nother discussion. I mean, for all of you, really, considering that. And so my question is, how do you communicate concerns with parents that also have their additional needs?
Experience. We're experienced. We've been doing this for quite a long time. I wouldn't expect a young teacher, I wouldn't leave a young teacher to do it on their own.
Never.
And you can almost, you know, we just know, don't we? We just know how to approach a parent.
So in
within 30
education,
seconds, really.
there will be a parent where the red mist has come down and they're at your door. In those instances, I always try and reschedule the meeting for the next morning and say, I hear, but I know they're not going to listen to me. And I also want time to find out some more facts about what's been happening. So I will reschedule till the next day and say, now come in, we're going to talk about this. Okay. And so they're in a much better place.
But then my worry is, if you've left me to stew overnight, because when I'm raging.
You're raging.
I'm raging. And so you've told me go home.
No,
all
I
right.
haven't.
And I'm coming for you tomorrow.
No, I've taken note of what you've said.
Yeah.
And I've said, let me find out a few more facts. And because you're saying it's whatever, and I don't know. I haven't had a chance to speak to the teacher. I haven't or what the playground supervisor was doing, or what the other child has. And I said, let me find out, and we'll, you know, 8:30 night. What time do you want? I'll give you the time.
I think that's an important point, to be able to say, I don't know the answer right now. Yeah. And people, you know, are comfortable with other people not knowing. They're not comfortable with giving the wrong answer, or
I thought they've been fobbed off as well, isn't it?
Or just telling them to go away. That's like you know, it's fine to not know. And I think it's kind of makes them a bit more relatable, because they know that you're human and you can say things that, you know, they're going to say as well. They're going to say, I don't know answers to questions.
And I think, so when you are, say, your officers are stopping someone with additional needs,
Yes.
Would you say that your officers are trained to deal with persons of low, like struggling abilities to maybe verbalize and presenting with different challenging behaviours?
There has been training delivered in it, whether that has meant
that is a really, you know, that's a really political answer you just gave me. That was so political.
Thank you. It's, again, you're going to get a wide variety of officers' understanding and abilities to communicate.
Have you had any scenarios in each of your areas where a situation has happened and you haven't communicated well with family and it's gone left, and what would you do differently?
I think if we get it wrong, the parents pull the child out of the pru. So we're very mindful. We also see, we're in partnership with mainstream schools. If it goes wrong, the parents will pull them out of school, and then they go into the elective homeschooling. So we don't want that to happen, because the safest place for any child is in school. I've seen that happen in 2 occasions. And yeah, we have to reflect, you know, because obviously something's gone wrong.
There's a word that keeps coming back to me, and when we're dealing with the families that we're dealing with, and we use it in education for children with additional needs or mental health difficulties, and it's reasonable adaptations. So we'll make reasonable adaptations in the classroom. If the child has ADHD, they might need to stand up. If the child, I don't know, has difficulties with writing, we'll give them a computer. It just depends what the child needs. I think we give reasonable adaptations to parents as well, based on their needs. And I'm guessing from what you said, it's similar. If you're dealing with a parent that has serious mental health problems, of which we have quite a few, then we need to find different and creative ways to get our message across. And that might be regular conversations. It might be they prefer email than to talk on the phone. That happens a lot. It might be that they prefer to come in and not to contact them at all on the phone or via email. And we will work with what works best for the parents, because if the parents are happy, the children will be happier.
Also, we need our staff, it could be different members of staff, but to have the relationship with that parent. And so we've employed a family support worker. She's got over 30 years of experience. She doesn't shame parents. She walks the walk with them. She can see that they've got debt and all sorts of other needs, and she'll just help them. And so often in those meetings, they'll ask for that person to be there. So it's finding who is that person that they'll be comfortable having in that room with them.
You're right that where we can, absolutely, and certainly maybe when we're, we will make adaptations in circumstances where it's viable to do so. There will be other scenarios, for example, in a custody suite, or if someone is actually being detained, if they're under arrest, where certain adaptations just simply can't be made. And that said, we will use appropriate adults for children or for adults with additional needs. We'll provide them with support. We'll have mental health nurses and custody nurses, and we're now getting more substance misuse treatment providers coming into custody suites as well. So we're getting that range of support available to people there. But it does make in certain circumstances, it makes that communication very, very challenging.
And you can't even know if someone's got a learning need over a phone.
No.
So what do you do?
It's difficult. And I think, often you'll find not just learning needs, but people with, trauma histories as a child. They could have been looked after or, had a social worker let them down in the past. So kind of navigating that can be very difficult, because you really don't know what you're going to walk into, what things you say might, trigger certain things, and it's difficult. I think we're lucky that, say for example, where parents have a Futures First worker, they're really good point of contact because they have an existing relationship.
What's a Future First worker?
So they are for people who have been in care as a child. So and they support them basically. They're personal advisors that generally have a pretty good relationship. So usually if they've had a conversation with that person before I call them, things can be a bit easier and just a bit.
And following on from that, how many of you rely on other professionals in other agencies and networks to help you foster better communication?
Well, that's the MASH team, multi-agency. We've got health, housing, education. We often, schools is like the big one. We're getting teachers and principals to have conversations with parents before we speak to them, just to kind of build a bit of a relationship, and for them to kind of say, you're going to get a call from this person, they're going to talk to you about this, but they're just trying to make sure your child is safe, and maybe they can do something to help you out. Maybe they know of something that can assist you.
So pivot into it.
We also have CAMS. We've got a resident CAMS team. We believe in therapy, so we've got a play therapist that we're funding. We've got a speech and language therapist, because our children communicate with behaviour, but they don't have the words. And so we feel strong. And an OT as well.
Their sensory needs.
Sensory needs.
You sound really privileged, I must say. From although you're dealing with the complex behaviour, which again is an extra pressure, but by having all of these additional resources.
It's not privilege, it's a choice.
We choose to spend our money that way.
We have less teachers, and we're
Really?
a multi-agency.
So
we're not a school, we're a service.
Right.
So we work with the mainstream schools and support them both in school and at Victoria Drive.
So by having those additional services, as you've just said, you've potentially taking away maybe some teachers, but you feel like that has a larger and more renowned impact by having the additional services in place?
We're trying to understand the child.
Yeah.
And the parents trying to understand the child. They may even have 3 other children who don't behave like this child. And so we're teachers. We know how to teach reading, but we don't know how to interpret everything. And whereas for these very young children, the play therapist has been, fantastic for us, because the children communicate through play. That's the natural communication. They're not going to talk to you about what's going wrong in their lives. But when you're observing, you can see it.
And that's what I was going to ask about. How do you ensure in your communication, especially if you're communicating with parents who are really the third person, so the concerns are related to the child. How are you guys keeping the child's voice at the centre? Because you're almost not getting at times to hear the child straight away. So for example, when you're worrying about, child sexual abuse, the referral has come from maybe someone's concerned or whatever. You haven't heard the child's voice first. So how are you ensuring that the child's voice is the centre of your communication?
Well, we would be looking to try and obtain the child's voice as soon as possible. And I mean, there's so if we're talking about sexual abuse or any form of serious abuse, the need to find the best way to hear that child and to hear what they may not be able initially to tell us. Often it's about building a relationship and identifying through partners who might be best to help that child feel safe enough to be able to talk about what has happened to them. So it can take a long time. It can be certainly if we're looking at exploitation and case of sexual exploitation, where girls who have been exploited as young teenagers finally feel like they feel safe enough to talk about it, maybe when they're 19, 20, 21, because the trauma that's been involved for so long. So it can be a slow process, but we also often don't have the luxury of allowing it to be too slow if we are looking at serious offending where we need to make an arrest, we need to try and get that person charged.
So there's also a difficulty with the child's voice, because their loyalty remains with the parent or the family or the carer. And our children have definitely been primed. If you talk, the social care will take you away from us. And that, for a 5, 6, 7-year-old, is the most horrendous thing for them to contemplate.
And do you ever challenge the parents about that narrative?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you?
Yes.
What does that conversation look like? Your child said, no, what is it?
I guess we want the parents to know that people don't want to take their children away from them. That is like last chance saloon, and we'll say that. We'll say this is not the intention, and this is not why I became a teacher, and it's not why the social worker is working. And I can assure you that it's highly unlikely in this situation that your child is going to be taken off of you. This is a supportive measure.
Yeah. And how did they respond
in fact, I've
to
had that conversation many times.
Really? And they respond positively to it?
Well, at times, some don't believe me.
They're like, you're lying for
some
them.
Some do, some don't.
Yeah.
And it depends on their own personal histories as well, and their own personal history of involvement with the social worker, and how they've experienced it.
Do you ever talk to the child?
Yeah, I did yesterday.
Did you? So what does that? What's the criteria for talking to a child in MASH, for example?
Well, I think it's got to be age appropriate. I'm not going to be calling a 5-year-old and having that conversation with them. But once they get to, I guess, those teenage years, most kids can, verbalise what they want to,
And how receptive are they to that?
It varies. It depends on a lot of kids just want to talk, so they're just, surprisingly, people say teenagers don't talk, but I would say generally they're pretty good at answering questions when they're in the mood to. So, and yeah, it's difficult over the phone, but maybe that also helps because they don't have someone in front of them.
Yeah, staring at them.
That's like, I guess, especially these days where a lot of people are using online counselling or that medium. Maybe they're a bit more comfortable that way sometimes. But it is tricky you have to obviously be age appropriate when you're talking to them about, sometimes some pretty serious things. So, it's a fine balance to.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Sorry to.
No, I want to know.
Would you ever consider communicating with a child, for example, via WhatsApp or text, rather than if they feel more comfortable sort of writing down what they're feeling rather than saying it verbally.
Yeah,
It's
well,
just really interesting about.
I don't know. I can't speak for all social workers or early help workers, but I'm pretty flexible. You know, some parents want to be emailed, or they, you know, or they want to book at a time where it's more, you know, they're in the right space, or, you know, it's just about being flexible.
I've known us to WhatsApp in MASH, and again, it's responding to the communication style that suits the receiver, especially when it's a child. And I understand the caution or the worries that people might have with that. But once you've ensured, you know, that this is their child's number, and, you know, again, parents' permission, are you okay for me to be having that conversation? And you can get so much more from it, and you can get a really in-depth voice, because ultimately the work that we're doing is for the child. One of the other things I was thinking about when we're communicating is the struggle between parental conflict. So you have this conversation, mum and dad are separated. Mum gives you one version, dad gives you another version. How do you communicate and ensure the child is still at the centre of cases where there's parental discord?
I guess the police are out there first, usually, most of the time, and kind of happen to. So, Tim, I don't know.
Do you have the answers?
Yeah.
Again, it's very difficult. You're right. You can often get situations where you are hearing two very different sides, and you know, we use the phrase counter allegation, that idea that someone say, you know, she said he did that, and he said she did that, and as you say, it's often the child is stuck in the middle, and in those circumstances, it's obviously we have to deal with any allegations that are being made, but I think we're so mindful of the fact that this poor child is stuck between often two warring parties, and so it's about protecting them, and you know, and often then that relies on the help of partners to do that, whilst we try and get on with trying to, and it's often impossible to try to untangle what is actually the real version of the truth. So yeah, it's a challenge, and I don't think we always get to the bottom of it, but it's about giving everyone the opportunity to have their say, and then and being fair as well, not immediately assuming that one person's version of events is always right.
And the loyalty, because again, what you guys were saying about some children are loyal to, either stressed with the loyalty, or they're loyal to one parent, and the narrative and the story might be a bit skewed and you just don't know. Do you guys have conflicting parental dramas in your setting?
Yeah. Same, yeah, of course. Sometimes it's just better to meet them separately. And it's annoying, but you have to do the same meeting twice. I've got it next week, actually.
Really? But you find that's a more effective way. But then do you say... Well,
that's a reasonable adaptation for the family.
Oh, I love that. This is my word of the week, reasonable adaptation.
It's
I'm
a
going to
reasonable
ask everyone
adaptation.
for a reasonable adaptation.
Well, they've both got responsibility for the child. If they're coming in and they both can't do it together, I'd rather do it separately than have two people come that can't. It's not going to be productive.
But what I'm hearing is that communication is about experience and confidence. What in my brain I'm worried about is my newly qualified social workers, my newly qualified midwives, my newly qualified teachers who are out there. They're not always supervised like one-to-one. How are they having these conversations?
Sometimes badly.
God.
We all have to learn how to do it, and often we learn, well, a lot, certainly I found in my career, you learn through mistakes. You get it wrong and you don't do it again.
You reflect on it.
Very much.
And you work on how you can make it different.
For weeks often.
Yeah.
And if you were a newly qualified, if you were your younger former selves, how would you tell yourselves to prepare for a good communication technique?
The sandwich approach is very good. Well, leaving the first word out of the sandwich. So it's start with the positives, like so-and-so's had a good day, and then move into the negative. So the parent's already open to hearing, you know, they're open. Oh, you've said something nice about my child. Now I'm coming into the honest, transparent truth, and then end it.
You buttered them up, didn't you?
Yeah, but they're open to it. Yes,
close it with a positive,
and then close it with a positive, and say we're going to have a better day tomorrow, or you know, whatever.
So if you're coming to my house and you're worried about my child, are you going to say, oh, you got a lovely living room, but I'm worried about your child. But oh, look at your front garden. Do you guys do the sandwich?
Hopefully not. I mean, I talk about transparency, hoping I wouldn't be that transparent. But yes, I mean, there's got to be. You can't just go in and go, right, we've had an allegation that your child's been hit. You know, you're not going to do that, but you're going to. I think what I mentioned at the beginning, it's about being open, being transparent, explaining, you know, helping empower the parent, even if there is a criminal allegation against them, but help them feel that they understand the process and they're not completely powerless, that they at least, you know, power through knowledge. It's that, you know, that, and sort of, I guess, reassuring them that, you know, again, we're not there to immediately lay blame on, you know, on anyone. It's very much our job is to investigate. Our job is to try and find out the truth. And okay, some parents might not want us to find out the truth because the truth, you know.
I mean, we're humans though, and I'm just thinking about having those conversations when some parents, some families are aggressive and abusive to you. Do you think, from, you know, being honestly reflective in your professional positions, how does that impact you when you've been, you know, verbally abused by a family and then you're still trying to help them? Does it block your communication? Does it change it?
I think so. Do you know what I'm thinking about? Batter it with kindness. So we look at a book every year, and last year we looked at a book that talked about, but specifically
Kindness
around
principle.
Bruce, about the kindness principles, and it's basically that you're going back every day with a positive response to the child, and I think the same applies with parents. So whatever happened the day before, the next day is a new day. You're starting afresh, and I think in our environment you have to be like that.
And they often apologise
Yeah.
and say, "Oh, I'm sorry I lost it with you."
No, if they're aggressive towards you, I'm thinking.
So how we feel, we just have to get up the next day and
Yes.
reframe and just get on with the.
Do you put down the phone when they're aggressive to you?
Not usually.
Oh, so how do you deal with that? So you've called me and I've said to you, calling me, don't, and you've put down the phone. Are you calling me back?
Yeah.
Ooh, are you? You're brave, you. And I say, you again? Where does that conversation go?
Well, I think a lot of the time I say, oh, look, I've just got a job to do, and people can understand that because they've got things they have to do in their own lives. So, you know, I tell them I'm not going to take up more time than I need to, but
Yeah, you gotta go.
yeah.
You just keep calling.
Yeah,
You're
well,
a persistent one, you, isn't it? Goodness, because I'm just thinking how hard it is to sometimes, you know, allow your personal feelings to not impact the way that we communicate, because the natural mechanism is to get your own back up.
I think that's where the inexperienced, they get their back up.
Yeah.
We mask, we're acting.
Yes, okay.
And that's how we've grown in experience. That's where our inexperienced colleagues, you know, and then you'll find them crying and, you know, really upset. I'm not saying it's not upsetting, but I feel it's sort of, I'm in my professional role and they're responding to my professional role, not to who I am. So I don't take it that personally, but then I've been doing it a long time. Whereas I think an experienced colleague, yes, I think the experienced colleague would take it more personally.
And I guess that's in all of us. It's the job and the professionalism, but at the same time, we're being trained to practice with empathy and warmth, and these are all in us. They're natural emotions, and it's difficult sometimes to balance what's really true. I hurt a lot.
We talk to each other. We'll talk to each other.
Okay, so you rely on your
Yeah.
colleagues. Okay,
Yeah, of course.
to have that
You have
conversation when there's a difficult
Also,
one.
if I thought in an instance that if I go in as the head teacher, the parent's going to think, oh, that's authority and whatever, I will choose a different colleague and say, you'll be better with this parent 100%.
But then don't you think if I'm the parent, it's almost like she can't manage me, I've got that one up?
I wouldn't see it that way. She may see it that way. That's her perception. But actually, I know she's going to talk
better with them.
And it may be that she wants to complain about me. That's fine.
But equally, sometimes it's better to talk to the head teacher. Sometimes I'll say, Eileen, this one you have to do this. Because, yeah, it has to be you.
And that's, I guess, what supervision and things like that are for.
We don't get supervision. That's our problem. Teachers do not get supervision.
I've never known that.
No supervision for a teacher.
So how do you offset and
Well, that's our
build?
recruitment and retention problem, isn't
I
it?
can imagine, because who am I
4
talking
years
to?
and they're out of the teaching profession.
Wow.
That's the reality.
And I think people don't realize that, the pressure then, because I have, that's something for me who's worked in this caring profession for so long. I wasn't aware that you guys carry all of what we carry without the support. We have monthly supervisions in, and we have group supervision. We have reflective exercises. I mean, social care is really quite good. I don't know about the police. Do you guys have regular supervisions and stuff?
It's got a lot better. Certainly, we have. I mean, every BCU area now has its own wellbeing team that provides a vast range of different welfare support options. Obviously, I've got 12 supervisors, sergeants working underneath me, and then they each have constables that are working underneath them. So, but yeah, debriefing is a hugely important part of policing. We don't often do it enough, but certainly, and especially in the world of child abuse or sexual offending, or there are processes in place that, well, there's psychological screenings, and there's understanding the trauma that the officers involved investigating it can suffer over time. I think that the Met have got much better at it, much better, and we have a welfare dog called Dexter who can book in, and he'll come to the office, and everyone can just stroke him, and he's lovely. I saw him the other day.
Really? I mean, you don't even have tea.
And often as DSLs, often we're hearing that horrible stuff as well.
And I think we need to do better. I'm gonna make it my partnership action. We're gonna have to do better. Look at me trying to change the world, innit? I don't know who I think I am.
We'll join you, Camilla.
But this is crazy. I mean, do you rely on your supervision to be able to, because you're processing, on average, if you're dealing with 10 families a day, 5 days a week, you're hearing 50 episodes of trauma a week.
Yeah, I think it's not just a formal supervision that you have once a month. We'll speak outside of work or during the day. Like, I think it's just checking in people. I will say it's a lot more difficult now that you've got people working from home, and so, but we've looked at other ways, like having online check-ins during the week and different ways to do it. But it definitely helps, because you don't want to kind of be left stewing with certain things for a long time. It's not going to set you in good stead to work in the job for a long time.
Because I think it blocks your communication. If you're not able to communicate professionally or communicate your concerns as a professional to others, how do you then communicate to families and expect them to communicate to you? So it's a circle. So learning from experience, finally, we're going to come to the end. Can each of you share a specific experience where a difficult conversation led to a positive outcome for the family and child?
A very aggressive parent. She was very unhappy with the setting that her child was in. And she had started to trust me. And so I mediated an in-year exchange to a different school. And at the time, the child was in absolute crisis. Behaviour was off the scale. And I went into the meeting. I spoke to the mum. I spoke to the school. We had a meeting together. That was not good. I then took mum out and then got the school to sign the form. I then took the mum. I then talked through with the mum about the change of placement. And then that child has now had a really successful end to primary school and is going off to secondary school, and his behaviour is completely stabilised.
And so what was your communication lesson in that?
I made lots of reasonable adaptations. I drove her there. I guess I acted like her mother at some points. I said, right, now you're going to go outside. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get this signed. We're going to go and do this. And now this is the next step.
So you communicated your actions and your level of support in order for a good outcome. Right, coming to you, Tim.
I reached out to my colleagues in the investigations teams, the child abuse investigations teams, and spoke to a couple of them over the last couple of days, and they were able to give a number of different examples, most of which were situations where there's that initial utter distrust of police, and whether, by the parents, and whether that's due to past experiences with law enforcement, whether that's due to what other people have told them, but and for the fact that we're there in the first place. But through, I'll come back again to, the conversations being open, being honest. An interesting, one of my colleagues said, give them a scenario where basically you sort of help them understand that if it was a police officer whose child had made a disclosure at school, we'd still be looking at them in exactly the same way as that we are coming in. You know, help them understand that we're not. This isn't a unique situation, and we are doing our best to treat them equally. It's about equity rather than equality, but it's about, you know, to the situation. But it's about, and there have been a number of scenarios where through those conversations, through those difficult conversations, providing reassurance in sometimes very difficult circumstances, you can slowly bring those parents around to at least understand our role, understand why we're there, accept that we are going to be involved in their lives for a while, and often very intrusively. But then that allows us to conduct the best investigation we can and safeguard the child, which is, in the end, all we're trying to do.
You, Nathan?
Yeah, I'm just thinking we get a lot of angry dads calling a lot of the time who are, you know, pretty upset because they haven't seen their kids, or, you know, they're, you know, just got a lot of worries, and they often feel like they haven't been heard. So I've had a lot of conversations with dads where, you know, just listening to them and giving some advice where they kind of start off, you know, they've spoken to social workers before who might have maybe been a bit dismissive, or, you know, they've had a bad experience with police, or, you know, because they sometimes feel the world's against them. So, you know, just hearing them out often can just be enough to de-escalate things. And, you know, I'm not always giving them the answer they want, but at least they've heard, you know, I've heard them, and they've got some advice to take some action. So, you know, that's a pretty common occurrence.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I really appreciate that, the fact that we've really been able to think about communication. And for me, the takeaway is that great communication comes from experience. And I think I want my newly qualifieds in all professions to be kind and gentle with themselves, that they're not going to get it right straight away, and that it's only through years of trying, successes, not getting it right, trying something else, learning to verbalize and vocalize and meet the family where they are, and providing, what was the thing you said?
Reasonable adaptations.
Reasonable adaptations, that we'll get there. So thank you for coming to see me today. And I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.